In most conflicts, especially at the beginning, countries tend to react rather than lead. They respond to attacks, defend their position, and try to manage the narrative based on what's already happened. But what's different here is the visible shift in behavior, moving away from simply reacting to events and instead shaping how those events unfold. This kind of shift signals a deeper level of strategic intent, where the focus is no longer just on immediate outcomes, but on controlling the direction of the entire situation. By rejecting external proposals and putting forward its own terms, Iran is effectively changing the dynamic of the conversation. Instead of being in a position where it has to accept, reject, or modify what others are offering, it is now setting the baseline for what negotiations even look like. That alone alters the balance, because it forces other countries to respond within a framework that Iran has helped define. It's no longer a one-sided process. It becomes a negotiation on its terms. There's also a strong messaging component behind this move. It communicates confidence, both domestically and internationally. Internally, it reinforces the idea that leadership is in control and not yielding to outside pressure. Externally, it sends a signal to adversaries and allies alike that Iran is willing to take initiative rather than wait for developments. This kind of positioning can influence how other countries calculate their own strategies, because they now have to consider not just what Iran might do next, but how it might shape the broader narrative. Another important aspect is how this affects perception. In global conflicts, perception can be just as important as action. If a country is seen as being in control of the narrative, it can shift diplomatic momentum in subtle ways. Other nations, especially those that are undecided or trying to stay neutral, may begin to adjust their stance based on who appears more decisive or influential. This doesn't necessarily mean they will openly support one side, but it can change how they engage, communicate, and position themselves moving forward. At the same time, this shift introduces new pressure points. When one side begins to take control of the narrative, the other side often feels compelled to respond more assertively to regain balance. This can lead to stronger statements, more visible actions, or even escalatory moves designed to counter that influence. In that sense, controlling the narrative doesn't just shape perception, it can directly impact the pace and intensity of the conflict itself. This transition from reacting to directing is rarely accidental. It usually reflects careful planning and a broader strategy aimed at long-term positioning rather than short-term gains. It suggests that decisions are being made with a wider perspective, taking into account not just the immediate conflict, but how it will evolve in the coming weeks and months. In situations like this, diplomacy doesn't simply disappear, it changes form. What used to be a space for compromise and de-escalation can gradually turn into a tool for gaining leverage. Instead of both sides trying to meet in the middle, each side begins using negotiations to strengthen its own position, delay unfavorable outcomes, or test the limits of the other side's patience and willingness to respond. When diplomatic talks shift into this kind of strategic pressure, every proposal, response, or delay becomes calculated. A ceasefire offer, for example, may no longer be about stopping the conflict immediately, but about shaping the conditions under which any pause might happen. By attaching specific demands or introducing new terms, a country can use diplomacy to push its agenda forward without taking direct military action at that moment. This also changes the way communication is handled. Public statements, official responses, and even silence can all carry strategic meaning. A delayed reply might be used to create uncertainty or apply psychological pressure, while a firm rejection can signal strength and unwillingness to compromise. In this environment, diplomacy becomes less about agreement and more about influence. Each move is designed to send a message, not just reach a resolution. Another layer to this is how both sides try to manage perception through diplomatic channels. By presenting themselves as open to talks while simultaneously holding firm positions, they can maintain an image of reasonableness while still advancing their strategic goals. This balancing act is important, especially on the global stage, where international opinion can affect alliances, economic relations, and political support. There is also a timing factor involved. Negotiations can be extended, paused, or restarted depending on what is happening on the ground. If one side feels it is gaining an advantage, it may slow down diplomatic progress to maintain that edge. On the other hand, if pressure increases, diplomacy can be used to buy time, regroup, or reduce immediate risks. This constant adjustment makes the entire process fluid and difficult to predict. As diplomacy becomes a form of pressure rather than a path to peace, the risk increases that misunderstandings or misinterpretations will occur. When both sides are focused on gaining advantage rather than reaching agreement, even small shifts in tone or wording can be seen as significant moves, potentially triggering stronger reactions than intended. This transformation doesn't eliminate the possibility of a peaceful outcome, but it does make it more complicated. The more diplomacy is used as a strategic tool, the less straightforward it becomes, and the harder it is to separate genuine efforts at resolution from calculated moves designed to gain the upper hand. When looking at the current situation, one of the more subtle but important signals is the level of caution coming from the United States. Instead of rushing into immediate, large-scale military action, there appears to be a more measured approach, one that involves observation, positioning, and calculated responses rather than quick escalation. This kind of hesitation is not necessarily a sign of weakness, but rather an indication of how complex and high-risk the situation has become. In conflicts involving multiple powerful actors, every decision carries weight far beyond the immediate battlefield. A single strike or aggressive move could trigger a chain reaction that draws in additional countries, escalates tensions rapidly, and limits the ability to control outcomes. Because of this, the U.S. often takes time to assess not just the direct impact of its actions, but the second and third-order consequences that might follow. This naturally slows down decision-making and creates the appearance of restraint. There is also a strong strategic calculation behind this caution. Acting too quickly can close off diplomatic options, reduce flexibility, and commit a country to a path that becomes difficult to reverse. By delaying or carefully pacing responses, the U.S. maintains a wider range of choices, from continued negotiations to selective military involvement, depending on how the situation evolves. This flexibility can be critical in a rapidly changing environment where new developments can shift the balance at any moment. Another factor is the need to coordinate with allies and partners. The United States rarely operates in isolation in situations like this. Decisions often involve consultation, alignment of strategies, and consideration of how allies will respond or be affected. This process takes time, and it can contribute to the perception of hesitation, even though it is part of a broader effort to ensure that any action taken is supported and sustainable. Domestic considerations also play a role. Public opinion, political dynamics, and economic concerns can all influence how quickly and aggressively a country chooses to act. Leaders must weigh not only the external consequences of their decisions, but also how those decisions will be received internally. This can lead to a more cautious approach, especially in situations where the risks are high and the outcomes are uncertain. At the same time, caution does not mean inaction. Military assets may still be repositioned, intelligence operations intensified, and contingency plans prepared. These steps allow for rapid response if needed, while still avoiding immediate escalation. It creates a situation where the U.S. is actively engaged but not fully committed to a single course of action. This combination of readiness and restraint adds another layer of complexity to the overall situation. Other countries may interpret this caution in different ways. Some may see it as an opportunity, while others may view it as a warning. These interpretations can influence their own decisions, contributing to an environment where every action and reaction is closely watched and carefully analyzed. What makes the situation even more complex is how the conflict is no longer confined to a single location or a clearly defined battlefield. Instead, it is spreading across multiple areas, both geographically and strategically, creating a much broader zone of tension. This kind of expansion doesn't always happen in obvious ways. It can develop gradually, with smaller incidents occurring in different places that, when viewed together, reveal a much larger pattern. In the past, conflicts like this might have been limited to direct exchanges between two countries within a specific region. Now, actions in one location can trigger responses somewhere entirely different. A strike or operation in one area can lead to heightened alert levels, retaliatory measures, or military movements in neighboring regions. This interconnected response pattern makes it difficult to isolate the conflict or contain its impact. Another important aspect of this spread is the involvement of different types of actors. It's not just national militaries operating within clearly defined boundaries. There are also allied groups, regional partners, and other forces that may act in support of one side or another. These groups can operate across borders and often have their own objectives, which adds another layer of unpredictability to how and where the conflict might expand next. The expansion is also visible in the types of operations being carried out. It's no longer limited to traditional military engagements. There are elements of cyber activity, intelligence operations, and strategic positioning that extend the conflict into areas that are less visible but equally significant. These actions can affect infrastructure, communication systems, and even economic stability, broadening the impact beyond physical battle zones. As the conflict spreads, the number of potential flashpoints increases. Instead of one central area of tension, there are multiple locations where incidents could occur. Each of these points carries its own risks, and any one of them could become the trigger for further escalation. Managing a single conflict zone is already challenging. Managing several at once makes coordination and control much more difficult. There is also a ripple effect on neighboring countries. Even those not directly involved can feel the pressure as borders become more sensitive, security measures increase, and the risk of spillover grows. These countries may begin to take precautionary steps, such as strengthening their defenses or adjusting their own strategies, which can further contribute to the overall tension in the region. As this expansion continues, it changes the nature of the conflict from something relatively contained into something far more dynamic and widespread. The lines between direct and indirect involvement start to blur, and the situation becomes less about a single confrontation and more about a network of interconnected events happening across multiple locations at the same time. At this stage, the situation can no longer be understood purely through a military lens. What's unfolding goes far beyond missiles, airstrikes, or troop movements. There is a deeper layer of political positioning and global influence shaping every decision, where each move is calculated not just for immediate impact, but for how it shifts power, perception, and long-term control. Every action taken is being closely watched by the international community, and countries are not just reacting to events. They are evaluating how those events affect their own standing in the global order. Influence is at stake, and that changes the priorities. It's not only about winning a confrontation, but about shaping the narrative, strengthening alliances, and demonstrating strategic capability on a global stage. Political signaling plays a major role here. Statements from leadership, official positions, and even the tone of communication are carefully crafted to send specific messages. These messages are directed not just at immediate adversaries, but also at allies, neutral countries, and even domestic audiences. The goal is to project strength, maintain credibility, and influence how others interpret the situation. There is also a significant element of power balancing. Countries are constantly assessing how far they can push without triggering an overwhelming response. This involves testing limits, observing reactions, and adjusting strategies in real time. It's a dynamic process where decisions are influenced by both current developments and expectations about how others will respond. Economic and strategic interests are deeply tied into this as well. Trade routes, energy supplies, and regional stability all play a part in shaping decisions. Countries that may not be directly involved militarily still have a stake in how the situation evolves because disruptions can affect their own economies and long-term plans. This creates a broader network of concern, where multiple nations are engaged in different ways, even if they are not visibly part of the conflict. Another layer is the competition for influence among major global powers. Even if they are not directly engaging in the conflict, they are observing, positioning, and sometimes subtly supporting one side or another. This can take the form of diplomatic backing, economic measures, or strategic alignment. The outcome of the situation could shift regional or even global influence, making it more than just a localized issue. As a result, decisions are no longer based solely on battlefield conditions. They are shaped by a combination of military realities, political goals, economic interests, and global strategy. This makes the situation far more complex, because each move carries multiple implications, and the true impact often extends far beyond what is immediately visible. One of the most critical aspects of this situation is that the most impactful developments are not always the ones making headlines. While public attention is often drawn to visible events like missile strikes or military movements, the deeper and more influential changes tend to happen quietly, through strategic decisions, internal planning, and behind-the-scenes coordination that rarely gets immediate coverage. These quieter moves often involve shifts in policy, changes in military readiness, or adjustments in long-term strategy that don't produce instant, dramatic visuals, but can significantly alter the direction of the conflict. For example, decisions about resource allocation, positioning of forces, or even internal command structures can shape how future actions unfold. Yet these are rarely discussed in mainstream narratives at the same level as visible conflict. There is also a strong element of information control. Governments carefully manage what is shared publicly and what remains undisclosed. This creates a gap between what is actually happening and what people perceive to be happening. In that gap, critical developments can take place without widespread awareness, allowing strategies to evolve without immediate scrutiny or reaction from the global audience. Another factor is the role of intelligence and covert operations. Not all actions are meant to be seen. Some of the most significant moves can occur through cyber activities, surveillance, or indirect influence that doesn't leave a clear public trace. These actions can weaken or strengthen positions over time, without triggering the kind of immediate response that overt military actions might provoke. Media focus also plays a role in shaping what people pay attention to. High-impact visuals and breaking news events naturally dominate coverage, while slower, more complex developments receive less attention. This doesn't make them less important. In many cases, these underlying shifts are what ultimately determine how the situation evolves. The difference is that they unfold gradually, requiring closer analysis rather than immediate reaction. There is also the strategic advantage of operating outside the spotlight. When actions are less visible, they can be carried out with greater flexibility and less external pressure. This allows for experimentation, adjustment, and long-term planning without the constraints that come with constant public scrutiny. It also reduces the likelihood of immediate retaliation, as not every move is clearly identifiable or directly attributable. All of this contributes to a situation where the most important changes are not always obvious. While the visible aspects of the conflict provide a sense of what is happening on the surface, the underlying decisions and quiet shifts are often what truly define the trajectory and potential outcomes of the entire situation.